Hello everybody and welcome to the video. So this is the third video in a series of videos I'm doing where I look at my favourite songs from the Vietnam War. In these videos I look at what the songs mean to me, I look at the historical context of the songs, and I also look at how they're still relevant to this day. In the previous two videos, I looked at Masters of War by Bob Dylan and What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, and if you're interested, they are linked up here. And today, what I'm going to be looking at is Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's classic, Ohio. So Ohio was recorded in 1970 by CSNY, or Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and it was written by the Y part of CSNY, the amazing Neil Young. It was written as a protest song against the killing of 4 protesters at Kent State University in Ohio, which is where the song gets its name from. So I'm going to explain what the Kent State shooting was, what happened, and the aftermath of the shootings. So in 1970, protests began to break out in America in response to the invasion of the neutral country of Cambodia. So on the 30th of April 1970, Richard Nixon authorized the invasion of the neutral country of Cambodia, which was beside Vietnam in Southeast Asia. Now this seemed to go against the American policy where they were talking about trying to take American troops out of Southeast Asia and to train up South Vietnamese troops and arm them to continue to fight against the communist North Vietnam. Now Nixon didn't announce the illegal invasion of Cambodia until 2 days after it had happened. He went on TV and told it. Even his defense secretary and his secretary of state only found it on TV. However, murmurs had begun to filter out the day after the invasion, and sporadic protests began to pop up all around America at the time. And one of those places where it popped up was in Kent State University. The first day of protests ended with clashes between the police and the protesters in the town of Kent, which is beside the university. And those in authority or in power in Ohio decided that they were going to declare a state of emergency because they said that the protesters were going to cause anarchy and chaos within the area of Kent. So the National Guard was called in. For those of you who don't know who the National Guard are, they've been in the news quite a bit in 2020 with the Black Lives Matters protests. But the National Guard are basically a reserve army, and their job is only to deal with domestic emergencies, whether they be real, like a natural disaster, or whether they be imagined, like in Kent State, or in the Black Lives Matters protests, where they're more so used to suppress the voice of the people. So these guys don't go abroad, they are purely domestic troops. So a massive protest was called for in the university on the 4th of May, but the university officials banned the protest. They said they were not to protest. The protesters still gathered in their thousands, but they were surrounded by the National Guard, who are now not only in the University of Kent State, but they're also in the town of Kent. And as the protests started to take place, the National Guard ordered the protesters to disperse. The protesters ignored, asserting their right to protest. It was a completely peaceful protest. And the National Guard then began to fire tear gas at the protesters. The protesters retreated, the National Guard advanced. Chaos ensued. Then, as the National Guard were beginning to pull back, they fired indiscriminately into the crowd. When they fired into the crowd, they shot dead 4 people, 2 young female students and 2 young male students. The National Guard claimed it was in self-defense afterwards, but investigations that came afterwards showed that it was not in self-defense, and even one of the protesters was shot in the back, and they were not, the National Guard were not in any immediate danger. So this incident sparked a wave of protests around America, and it shocked Neil Young, who got the band CSNY together, and they wrote and recorded the song within 17 days of the event actually taking place, which is really quick time to turn around, write and record a song at that time. And it really became a new anthem for the anti-war movement, expressing the anger that people were feeling over this brutal assault on people's right to protest. Now, the soldiers who did fire into the crowd, they were identified, but within 3 years all charges were dropped against them and they were never put on trial. And I think it's things like this where soldiers or police who aren't held accountable for their heinous actions, for murdering people, has really led to the massive outcry within a country like America right now, where they're looking for accountability for people who've done things that are in any instance wrong. So that's the historical context of the song. So let's delve a little bit into lyrics. So the song starts with the line, "Tin soldiers and Nixon's coming." Tin soldiers and Nixon coming refers to the soldiers, whether they be National Guard soldiers or army soldiers, and then being used as pawns to push the agenda of those in power. Like, these soldiers, they aren't supposed to have a heart, they aren't supposed to think, they're supposed to follow orders and push the agenda of whoever's in power. In this case, the person in power is represented by Richard Nixon, but really it's a deeper look at the establishment. And in a state, the army, the police, the establishment are used to push and enforce the agenda of those in power. And history has shown that this is nearly always a bad thing, and generally is used to oppress the people who have a different viewpoint from those in power. Now, the bringing of soldiers into any protest is really turning activism into terrorism. When do you bring an army in? You bring an army in to fight an enemy combatant. So by bringing the army in, whether that is with the Black Lives Matter movements in 2020 or the Democracy Now! Movements in Hong Kong, or the civil rights movements of the 1960s, or the women's rights movements and the anti-war protest movements of the 1960s, if you're bringing an army in, you are turning these people into terrorists. And this really shows the fear that those in power have of the public or of real democracy. Now, we live in a world right now where there is one superpower, kind of one polarity within the world, which is the United States. And it's kind of representative of every country. You know, there is those who are in power, and they are, you know, the polarity to which everyone is supposed to come towards. But what people are beginning to realize, and what the protest movements of the 60s and 70s really began to show, is that there is a second superpower out there, and it's not another country. It is public opinion. And we've seen that throughout since, whether that be with the public really making sure that Nixon couldn't continue on the war in Vietnam because he was afraid there would be unrest at home, or whether we saw with the Arab Spring in 2011 where there was the authoritarian figures on top and the public were there and able to overthrow them. So there is this battle whereby the only people that can stop those in power from running amok is the public. They've developed many ways to deal with and undermine the power of the public. In more authoritarian states, you know, they can usually just rely on violence and intimidation to stop the people. But in places that are possibly more democratic and stuff like that, they usually use a series of methods to try to control the public. In the US in 1956, an illegal surveillance campaign that went on for 15 years up until 1971 was used to spy on activists of any kind, whether they be civil rights, women's rights, anti-war, peace groups. They surveilled them illegally and would try to blackmail the leaders, intimidate the leadership, and try to undermine their agendas. They will also sometimes have to give in to the demands from the public, whether that was Nixon deciding that he couldn't go ahead and try and win the Vietnam War, or the police reforms that are coming in now in America with the Black Lives Matter movements, or even within Ireland, there was a protest that led to the dropping of the proposed water charges. But the thing is, those in charge generally will want to enact the mildest reforms possible, because generally they don't want to change the system too much. The system has generally worked quite well for them. They're in a good position, a position of power, and you know, so they're not wanting to bring in maybe the radical reforms that the protesters are looking for. Instead, are really looking for that mildest reform to try to keep control as much as possible. Another way of controlling the public to stop them from I suppose, showing their true power is by trying to quieten them through violence. And there's two kind of ways you can do this. You can do it in a propaganda way. So you could do it with the media, with news stories, with movies and films and articles and all like this, which are designed to scare the population, to drive a wedge between the population, and to not have them come together in unity. And instead, what they're looking to do is they're looking to get you to rely upon the government to keep you safe, and not look to your neighbour or look to another community to keep you safe. But instead, they will stoke the fear within you, and then they will say, look, the government will look after you. And of course, then there is the overt violence, which we saw at the Kent State University shooting, but also which we've seen in many cases up until now. We saw it in the civil rights movement, we saw it in the women's rights movement, we've seen it in the Black Lives Matter marches at the moment, where protesters are being attacked. And the reason for this is to go with, well, they'll think twice before they come out against them. Anybody who's kind of on the fence, might be scared into not going out there and contributing to the chaos. And it's always the protesters who are blamed for the chaos and soon. It's never the police. It's like, well, if the protesters weren't out there, this wouldn't happen. But it is not necessarily them who are instigating the violence. Now, another lyric that Neil Young put in here that I love was, what if you knew her and saw her dead on the ground? And here he's talking to one of the victims of the Kent State shooting massacre, and he's trying to really pull us into the reality of it, the grief of what's actually happened, and get beyond the news stories, the sensational kind of news stories of, this person, 4 people are dead, and it can become quite sensationalized. He's trying to get us from behind the kind of the glass screen of the TV or the glass screen of whatever, and he's trying to get us instead to look at the person. This could be anybody in your community. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't matter what religion you are. It doesn't matter what your political leanings are. This could happen to anybody, and you gotta feel the empathy. What if you knew her? What if this was one of your own, as people would say? And that need to connect in, whether it be people of a different race, people from a different nationality, people from a different continent who live a completely different lifestyle to you, or a different religion, or a different gender, whatever it is, to look at them as the individuals that they are and put your own feeling into that. So Neil Young finishes the song with the line, how can you run when you know? And this is such a powerful song. We can't say we don't know. We can't hide, whether it be destruction of our environment, whether it be sexism, racism, violence against different religions, violence against different communities and nationalities. We have to stand up, and we can't run away from it anymore. We have to have the courage to stand there and stand our ground and try to make the change. Our eyes have been opened, and we need to not try to find excuses. There's loads of things that will be used to try to distract us. Whether it's vacuous TV, whether it's sports, whether it's video games or shopping or all these things that are used to distract us. We need to put these aside and look at the problems. I mean, especially when you look at something like the environmental catastrophe that is upon us. This won't go away. It will. We need to stand and face these things, and we can't run away. So that is my 2 cents worth on Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's Ohio. It's an incredible song. I'll put a link to the song below, and I'll also put up a few links to videos and articles which I find really interesting on some of the topics that I've touched on here. So if you liked the video, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to think about it. If you think I'm wrong on something, I'm totally open to that kind of discussion as well. Or if it's if there's a point you'd like to make, that would be great as well. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video when I'm going to be looking at Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Thanks a million for watching.